Good evening. Welcome to Community and Technology, where we connect the global community with news, information, and resources that we hope to help improve your life. I'm Stu Reid. This is my co-host, Dave Burstein. Hey, Dave.
Hello.
How you doing, man?
Not too bad. I've managed to dodge COVID so far,
Well,
but
lucky you. It just nabbed me last week after 2.5 years.
yeah, Jenny
Yeah,
got it.
Jenny did.
Jenny got it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it wasn't that bad, and we weren't that afraid.
Mm-hmm.
Because she was double boosted, we knew it was almost certainly going to be very mild. And in fact, she wanted to get up and start going out 3 days after her first positive test.
Mm-hmm.
But she waited 5 days. In fact, I took her into waiting another day or two because there was nothing terribly exciting to get her out of the house.
Mm-hmm. I was similarly mild in my symptoms. I guess I would also attribute that to the multiple vaccines that I had. I had a fever for a day and a half and was kind of knocked out for maybe 2 days. But day three, I was up and about at the computer working, and really symptoms were very mild from there going forward. By day five, I was moving around. Actually, went out, and the day six, I tested negative. So I'm thankful that I got through it fairly uneventfully. Unfortunately, my spouse, Linda, my nurse and spouse, she caught it in taking care of me. So now I'm nursing her. And so far, it looks pretty mild on her part as well. I think thanks to, I guess we've had four shots, four vaccines, two shots, two boosters. So I think that helped mitigate the symptoms for both of us.
Let's tell people a little bit more, just since we've had the direct experience.
Okay.
First thing, uh, over 1 million people have died in the United States, almost as many in Brazil, where thankfully the guy who said, let him die, Bolsonaro, lost the election,
Thank
but
goodness. Mm-hmm.
it was very close. As a lot of American elections are going to be by the time this show gets on the air.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at that, you say serious doctors, Peter Hosich, world class virologist, and many others are saying at least half those deaths could have been avoided if more people use vaccines
Mm-hmm.
and basic protection like masks. That is a heck of a lot. But there's something even more frightening from Peter. Peter is actually a virologist who's created vaccines that are in use by over 100 million people around the world.
Mm-hmm.
So he's got the right to an opinion. He said that we've had 3 waves so far, not of COVID, but more severe ones. One from SARS, one from MERS, and now the third from COVID. And there will be a fourth one, he guarantees us. He doesn't know whether that's going to happen next year or 10 years from now, but he knows enough to know it's going to happen. So we want to be prepared for that in many ways. It's not, we were very, very lucky that a few brilliant scientists came up with the mRNA vaccines. These were the first of the entire new class of vaccines made in a new way that was just in the labs. And it's going to allow the vaccines to be made and updated much faster. Since then, there are 5 other vaccines. Hosted one of them, which is being used in India and Indonesia. The Chinese have 2 of them. There's one coming from Vietnam, and there's several coming from other major drug companies. But the mRNA was the first out there, and it saved a lot of lives, and we're welcome. Why are people afraid to take it?
There's so much paranoia, Dave. I know in the black community there's historical evidence that a lot of the medications that they prescribe for us as a people were had hidden agendas. Go back to the Tuskegee experiment, where they gave us syphilis to experiment to see what happened. You look at what's going on in the prisons and how low income black and brown folks are being experimented on with different drugs in prison, in the prison system. So there's a very deep history of abuse by authorities of folks of color. So I mean that's one of the reasons why black folks are skeptical of getting a vaccine that's being promoted by the government. Now, I kind of contrast that with at the same time, I can recall, Dave, and I'm sure you can too, because we were about the same age. Back when we were in grade school, there was uniform vaccination for chickenpox and for the mumps. And everybody in grade school got those. We got them in the school. I remember in probably fourth or fifth grade. And there was no question back then. Now, of course, we didn't have all the information about the Tuskegee experiment and all the other abuses. So maybe as a people, we were more naive back then. But I think that is an undercurrent that you cannot dismiss when it comes to black folks. That's always there, just a basic distrust of the medical establishment. So that's a difficult one to overcome. In the face of all the deaths, however, that has been undeniable. So it's a bit of a contradiction. I guess the other thing that the paranoia on the side of folks that have been marginalized and experimented upon for a couple hundred years is the paranoia about the actual epidemic itself, and where that came from, whether there are any hidden agendas. There's all kind of conspiracy theories about hidden agendas for that and why it is, and who benefits and what the actual global outcomes are going to be. So you got all that swirling around. So it's hard to be quote unquote objective. But I will say, when I looked at the people dying in the hospitals 2 years ago, Dave, dropping like flies, photographs of bodies piling up in the hallways of hospitals, that gave me pause, and that told me that okay, experiment or not, I'm not going down like that, and I'd rather take a risky vaccine than end up one of those bodies piled high in the emergency room. So that's what drove me, Dave, to take my vaccine soon after they were available.
The vaccines became available under emergency use. As I said, mRNA vaccines had never been used for anything in the past. They were working on them in the labs, but they had never given them to human beings for anything. So when it first started, it was a risky vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
There was careful trials that seemed very positive, but that was only a few thousand people. And sometimes you don't know what's going to go on till 1 million people, or 10 million people have tried something.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we now have 500 million people who've tried the vaccines.
Is that the right number, Dave? 500 million have had it?
I don't know the exact number,
wow.
But I'm sure it's something like that, or
hundreds
maybe
of millions.
higher.
Mm-hmm.
It's, the United States, China, Western Europe are all something like 80% vaccinated.
Okay.
There's hundreds of millions additionally vaccinated in India. So Yeah, it's probably well over a billion by
Yeah.
now, but I don't happen to know the number.
Mm-hmm.
There have been a few serious reactions. They're so serious that they make them, at least the medical press, anytime they happen, because there's so few of them.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking 1 in a million having a severe reaction. Now, my arm was sore. Jenny actually had a pretty bad reaction. Her
Did
arm
she?
was sore for about 2 months.
Wow.
Well, but she just actually got COVID and it was very mild.
Mm-hmm.
So the evidence is clear, and let us hope that the maniacs who don't want to have vaccines, who think that masks and isolation do nothing, are outvoted and outshouted, and frankly, shouldn't be allowed on Twitter or Facebook and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Although it looks like that battle has been lost right now.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good segue, Dave. That's a good segue to Mr. Musk and his takeover of Twitter and what that portends for so-called free speech, crazy speech, hellish speech. What's your take? I mean, nobody knows what the hell he's going to do, clearly, but I think he relishes in that, and I think he relishes being a wild card and kind of throwing fuel on the fire, if you will. To me, that's something that he kind of like, likes dancing with the devil in that regard. So who knows where that's going to go? What's your take? You have any
Well, everybody
feelings?
thinks they know based on the number of opinions I'm reading in the press and my Twitter feed,
Right.
everywhere else. People are certain, and I don't have much to add to the things they're saying. But there's a couple of things that are clear. One is that he's a brilliant businessman, and SpaceX is a remarkable achievement.
Mm-hmm.
So is Tesla. He's done both of them by taking more risks than most businesses would. SpaceX took risks that NASA never would have, knowing that there were risks. And he's been pretty lucky. Not too many people have been killed by Tesla's autopilot. There have been a few. My gut is that more lives have been saved than taken, but no, we don't have the data on that yet. But he was willing to make that. The other thing is he's clearly a liar
Mm-hmm.
who lies to himself about the prospects of his products. Tesla's so called self driving isn't close to self driving in general. It works pretty well on the highway. People are using it. That's how we know that people can be killed by its defects. And it's probably pretty good. But he said that would be available 2 years ago, working fully
Mm-hmm.
in the cities. It wasn't. And he said lots of things like that. He linked to a tweet last week. Did you see that?
No, which one?
Uh, Pelosi's husband,
Mm.
who's a mega millionaire, maybe more, maybe a billionaire, was had his skull cracked by somebody who had broken into their house and was coming after Speaker Pelosi. Some people on the web put up, oh, this was a male prostitute who was servicing Mr. Pelosi, who he knew well. That was on the web. Elon Musk linked to that. There was, of course, no evidence, and it's prohibitively unlikely to be true. So he's been seen smoking marijuana cigarettes. He's made lots of amazing statements. So he's also clearly, while brilliant, often stoned out of his mind and
Hmm.
sometimes does and says crackpot things. Is it a good thing that we have somebody like that with the what he's happy to call the most powerful communications medium? I'll let the audience decide
Yeah.
that one.
Well, certainly not in my book. I mean, just to backtrack briefly, yeah, he certainly has been very brilliant with his technology decisions and the risks that he's taken on technology to make the technology happen, both with SpaceX and with the Tesla, his electric car. But Twitter is, in my mind, it's not a technology play; it's a social media play. And so it doesn't require any genius, any technology genius whatsoever, in my mind, unless he comes up with some algorithm that's going to like monitor and moderate the speech. But clearly, he's not even interested in that. I think he's talking about putting together a council to monitor the speech, but I think that's going to be mostly window dressing. Will be my guess. So I don't see where his innovative technological brain is going to bring any kind of positive impact to that platform. So I am pessimistic. I mean, I hope I'm wrong. I really pray that I'm wrong, but I see dire days ahead. And certainly that tweet that he did regarding Pelosi's husband, I think it's a good indicator as to where he's coming from and how willing he is just to say things to promote his platform and to promote him. And so to me, that's a very scary proposition.
Now, one of the reasons that it's highly likely that his stuff won't be effective is moderating. Even if he did moderate it, taking good advice and doing sensible things is by looking at Twitter, where there's an incredible amount of abusive stuff going over it still.
Mm-hmm.
As anybody who looks there can find right away. Did I say look at Twitter? I meant to say been talking about it. I wanted to say look at Facebook,
Okay.
where there is an incredible amount of really ugly stuff that gets there, whether it be anti-black, anti-Jew, anti-Pelosi,
Mm-hmm.
and some nonsense from people on the left as well.
Mm-hmm.
Let's not just think that it's right wingers who are crazy.
And Facebook has some sort of algorithm. I don't know if it's an algorithm or people, but presumably they are exercising some sort of moderation of speech and hate speech on their platform, are they not?
And it's clear that it's not working very well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we know it's not going to work very well. And that becomes hard. But that was my way to take us over to the Amazon, Google, Facebook virtual meltdown in stock prices.
Mm. Really, what's going
Nothing
on?
has been more dramatic than Facebook that has lost $700 billion in its stock market value. It's gone
Now,
down from over
well,
a
what is that
billion,
proportionally, Dave? That's a huge number, but they're so big. What is that proportionately?
75%.
What?
I checked before we went on the air.
75%?
75%. From
Whoa.
about a billion to this morning, it was 247, from about a trillion rather, to this morning, it was 247 billion.
Wow. That's
As it,
tremendous.
and it's happened to a lot of other things. Netflix lost as much.
Really?
Uh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And as a percentage,
Mm-hmm. So
their
now
value.
we know, let me just back up. We know that the stock market has gone through the roof over the last 10, 15 years. I mean, I can remember when, you and I have been around long enough, Dave. We remember when the bubble burst back around 2000 when they had the internet bubble burst and the stock market was struggling, at least NASDAQ was around, I think, 2,500 and the Dow Jones was struggling to hit 5,000. And what is it now? Where's the Dow now?
A heck of a lot more than that.
Yeah, it's like in the 20,000 or something, right? It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Now, it's down a little bit over the last year, but it's still very high. But the stocks we're talking about were ridiculously high
Mm-hmm.
when you look at their earnings and their earnings prospects and how you judge them. Facebook may be down so low that I have an intelligent analysis in front of me that says it's gone down so much, it's a good buy. It
Ah.
might be.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Hmm.
actually often a good way to understand the market. The first, but behind it is the acknowledgement that the market is driven often by the madness of crowds.
Madness of what?
Crowds,
Crowds. Okay. Mm-hmm.
which is a term of art, and that what you see, whether it be the value of Bitcoin or the value of Facebook or the value of Microsoft, is something that goes in waves often that get wildly exaggerated,
Mm-hmm.
up and down. I remember you're talking about 2000. Companies like Covad, one of the first DSL providers, went public within a year, although it was losing a pile of money. It was worth $10 billion on the stock market.
Mm.
Rhythms and Net Point, North Point, not quite as high, but
Mm-hmm.
enormous amounts, into the billions. All of them shortly thereafter went broke. Uh, and one that's broke right now is one called Starry, an interesting technology company that was worth almost $2 billion a year ago and is now worth 37 million and is looking for somebody de facto to buy them out of bankruptcy.
Wow. That's a heck of a nosedive.
Yeah. Now, in that case, a big part of the nosedive is it was much too high when it went up. They have a fairly nice wireless to the rooftop business. They put an antenna on the roof of a building like mine, use the building wiring to get 200 megabits down to all the apartments.
Mm-hmm.
Perfectly sensible way to do things, but not nearly enough to. Well, I think they're losing 40 million quarter at the moment.
Mm.
And to get break even, they would need to have 5 times as many sales as they have right now, according to their numbers.
Wow.
So they never should have been worth that kind of money
Mm-hmm.
based on fantastical thoughts and projections.
Mm-hmm.
They're a legitimate company serving almost 100,000 people, offering a $50 200 megabit service that, if it was taken up by 10% of the people in the buildings they serve, would be quite profitable. And people looked at that, said, sure, they'll get 10 or 20%. Heck, uh, they were wrong. And one of the things to take away from the Facebook stock price is that the market is often mad
Mm-hmm.
and often irrational.
Mm-hmm.
And they buy a lot of tulip bulbs.
Yeah.
You know that story, right?
Yes. Yeah. Why don't you repeat it briefly for our audience who may not be familiar with it?
Back around 1600, collecting tulip bulbs, especially hybrid bulbs with remarkable mixed colors, became a national passion in Holland, to the point where individual bulbs were going for the equivalent of 50 and $100,000, because people said, "Oh, we can buy that bulb and grow it, and from that bulb we can make 5 more, and from those 5 more we can make 25 more, and look how much it's worth in the marketplace." It was one of the most ridiculous speculations in history. total collapse. You might as well eat them like onions by the time, by 2 years after these high prices, when it came all the way down. And it's a classic example, in fact, of the madness of crowds. And the book by that title described it quite well and is
Mm-hmm.
still worth reading, although it's clearly out of date at this point. We saw that, you're talking about 2000. I remember companies like
AOL? How
AT&T,
about AOL?
Time Warner that took over AOL,
Did they take a
losing
bath?
Verizon, losing 50, 70, 90% of their value shortly after the boom. I was in the middle of the boom. I didn't get rich off it. I got a few perks and got to travel around the world talking about technology that everybody for then was interested in. Uh, but it all came crashing down.
Mm-hmm.
Now, something else that remind me there to tell people to be cautious about before we go to a break is the press and how often it gets it wrong. You were talking about how many people don't believe what they've been reading and hearing in the press about vaccines. I've looked pretty close at the primary data and closely follow some serious physicians on it. I have no doubt, very, very few competent people have any doubt at all. Not there. But the press often gets things wrong. Among other things, MarketWatch reported that I had predicted the crash after the boom.
Really?
Yeah. They found some remark I made that was skeptical about how high the values were.
Mm-hmm.
And 2 years later said I had predicted the crash. I had no idea there was going to be a crash or anything of the magnitude that actually happened. I did know that a number of stocks in the fields I write about were overvalued and said as much.
Mm-hmm.
But they put me out there as a prophet,
Wow. Well, the press loves a good story.
and I'm seeing it all the
Yeah,
time
yeah.
where I know this stuff in depth. And there was a story you wanted to break. Let me introduce it before we go to the break.
Okay.
The phone companies in Europe have dissuaded the bureaucrats at the European Union that they should be allowed to collect billions off the top from Google, Apple, Facebook, YouTube, and so on. And the way the story that you sent me read, it said the companies, the internet companies, should pay their fair share of the cost because it's so expensive to build the internet. Now, that story was accurate about quoting the top EU officials, inspired by the CEO of Deutsche Telekom and people like that. And
Mm-hmm.
I've been following this story for a while, but it's utter and total nonsense on three levels. Beside all the problems with where the money goes from and net neutrality, beside the fact that the reason the EU people like it is the giant internet companies are American, so they like the idea of making the Americans pay. It wouldn't go to build the European internet networks. And I say that based upon the many comments from people like the CEO of Deutsche Telekom, who has said this is necessary, but never said that it would increase the investment they make in networks.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, has told Wall Street several times that they were actually going to be cutting their investment in the next few years after the 5G networks and the fiber networks are generally built out. They'll still
Wow.
be investing a lot of money. In other words, anything they collect from YouTube and Facebook and Netflix
Mm-hmm.
would go straight to the profitability of those
I don't
companies.
mind. What?
The
Incredible. Yeah,
reporter, that wasn't the headline on a lot of
yeah,
stories
yeah,
there.
yeah. Okay, I want to
We'll
come
have
back to
more
that
after the break.
because that's an issue that has been raised in this country as well. So after the break, I want to delve into that a little deeper, Dave. This is Community and Technology on WHCR 90.3 FM. Stay tuned. We're going to take a brief break and be right back. Okay, we're back. Community and Technology with Dave Burstein and Stu Reid on WHCR 90.3 FM. Before the break, we were talking about a big headline in Europe where the tech giants are being pressured by European telcos to pay
I got the
for
exact
carriage.
headline in front of me. You sent
Okay,
it to
go ahead,
me.
Dave.
The European telco industry pushes big tech to pay for building the internet.
Wow.
It is utter and total nonsense. Might be right for big tech to pay for building the internet. And in fact, I'm thinking of writing an article about how Google and Netflix should go and just like Google's built fiber in Kansas City, build it all over Greece, which is the country in Europe that has the worst internet.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not what these proposals are about. These proposals are about letting Deutsche Telekom and the other European companies charge Netflix and YouTube for carriage. That would be billions of dollars and be the greatest breach of the principle of net neutrality in history.
Yeah,
And we've been
didn't we just
talking
go
about
through
this.
all these arguments over here, Dave, 2, 3, 4 years ago in the U.S. when net neutrality was a big deal and people like the carriers are trying to get Netflix and YouTube and the big content carriers to pay a premium. And it was looking like if that happened, that they would be favored and other smaller players would be marginalized. And it was kind of kibosh.
Yeah. Now, it turned out in the US that even when Ajit Pai killed the net neutrality rules, it had very little effect. In particular, the phone companies and the cable companies realized that if they really took advantage of it, they might be in trouble in Washington. And it wasn't that important because and something the size of the telephone companies, it wasn't that much money.
Mm-hmm.
And getting $10 billion a year to France Telecom and Spain's Telefonica and Deutsche Telekom would be a nice increase of the profits of Deutsche Telekom and France Telecom and so on, but not nearly as much, for example, as if they raised the rates 7%, as Charter just did in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, that the numbers that are involved in this are real or substantial. It would be an obvious mistake, but they're not that big. And it's all about, and they got the EU supporting them strongly because it would be the European big companies collecting from the Americans. And everybody around the world hates the big American companies just
So
because,
politically, it looks really good.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
actually, it is totally torn apart by BEREC, the Association of European Regulators. Totally blew apart all the arguments of the telcos. And it's a 30-page paper from BEREC, BEREC, which can cover this in much more depth than I can do on the radio. But one of the things it shows, and again, should you trust what you believe, whether it be about vaccines or telco subsidies or broadband subsidies? Half of the broadband subsidies in the United States are going to be totally wasted, according to the current plans. And the people in charge sort of know it, but they can't face the fact they're making such big errors going along with the system. And there's an enormous amount of money pushing. So we see what's happening in Europe, and it's no different than what happens here with massive companies spending massive amounts of money to hire some of the best and most persuasive liars on earth,
Mm-hmm. Hmm.
including, uh, I don't think Vesberg, the key European official in this stuff, is a crook. I think she's just been told so many ways by so many people who were so persuasive, who had been hired by the phone companies to persuade her that this was a sensible thing to do, that she believes it. She makes mistakes too. We all make enormous mistakes. In fact, the smarter we are in many ways, the more likely we are to make mistakes on issues like this. It turns out the psychologists have been very persuasive, looking at the problem. They call it confirmation bias or cognitive dissonance. People are naturally optimistic. They think when they go to Vegas, they're going to come back winning.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll look at the 1 in 10 who come back winning and say, that's going to be me. And the evolutionary biologist said this was very important because to get off your butt when it's snowing hard and to go out and hunt for some game in the winter when there's very little game and you might have to be out there for 2 days in the snowstorm, you need a push
Mm-hmm.
and a confirmation. And the evolutionary biologists see that as where it's coming from. It's something we all know, and we all
Mm-hmm.
see it in everybody,
Mm-hmm.
including our friends and
Yeah, yeah,
ourselves.
yeah. You just reminded me, Dave, listening to you talk about that kind of reinforcement. When I was at our esteemed alma mater studying behavioral psychology, they talked about there was a guy named B.F. Skinner who was a big behavioralist, and they talked about reinforcement, and the strongest behaviors, the strongest habits are built with intermittent reinforcement, where you got to do something 10, 20 times, then you get reinforced. And you got to do it another 10, 20 times and get reinforced again. That ends up being a more enduring, long lasting behavior than one where you get reinforced all the time. And then if the reinforcement stops, you stop it. So I'm just kind of that just kind of went through my mind when you talked about, you got to get up off your butt and get out there and hunt, knowing that, you may not get it, but, that 1 in 10 times that you do, that makes you go out there the next time. And it's a very enduring behavior and very enduring reinforcement pattern, the way that works.
And one thing that I don't think the psychologists had figured out when we were in school, but now is very clear in the textbooks, is the smarter you are, the more convinced you're right.
Yeah.
Whether you're a vaccine skeptic, some of whom are very smart, uh, or, well, I remember interviewing one of the best virologists alive at the time. This would have been about 1987. We now talk about RNA viruses, including AIDS. This guy had discovered the first one. He was a Berkeley professor. Mm-hmm. He was one of the two serious people on Earth who had enormous respect for their achievements, who thought that HIV was not the cause of AIDS. His name was Duisberg. And there was no doubt that he was one of the most qualified people on Earth. But somehow he had got this one wrong. And he was going around the world, including stopping at the radio station I was working at then. And I took him out to lunch, telling people that HIV didn't cure AIDS. It didn't cause AIDS. That was total crackpot. And 99 out of 100 qualified scientists thought it was total nonsense. And 1 out of 100 didn't. So he got a lot of press. He was there to be on the Gary Knowles show on WBAI, who at one point said AIDS is really tertiary syphilis. And if you dose up heavy with antibiotics, you can defeat it. The doctor who he got that word from and had on the radio died of AIDS not long after.
Wow.
And he had Duisberg on, who was the most credible. So we all make mistakes. Vesberg's made mistakes. But there's so many people telling her all the arguments coming from the companies that they believe it. And the stupid writer at CNBC picked up the same mistake. To say that money should go to pay for building the internet in Greece, which, as I say, probably has the worst internet, worse than Bulgaria, for example. Perfectly plausible thing to say. To say that the money that the phone companies collect from Google and YouTube would have anything to do with whether they're building the internet. Incompetent reporting, pure lie, although that lie's been said so many times by so many persuasive people. I see this in Washington, where years ago I started calling them the 2 + 2 = 5 gang. Jim Ciccone of AT&T was the very best. He could persuade people of almost anything. He's retired now. And what's her name? At CTIA, used to be a FCC commissioner. Baker. Mm-hmm. Is now saying a pile of ridiculous things and is being paid $6 million a year by the phone companies to be their representative in Washington, persuading the folks at the FCC often to believe in total nonsense.
Mm.
And I'm sure that she's convinced herself of them. The latest is the biggest one she got away with. In the last tax thing, there's a corporate minimum tax being put in that the corporations have to pay a minimum of 15%, uh, which managed to get through Congress by a tie-breaking vote by the vice president. There was an exception written into it for the phone companies. Why, the New York Times said? Because they had been told that it might hold back the deployment of 5G.
Wow.
Now,
Wow.
beside the fact that 5G ain't something so special that we would give away billions of dollars in tax
Yeah.
breaks to Verizon and AT&T, it wouldn't have affected them at all. That everybody who competent who knew this stuff knew at least a year ago. I didn't get it 3 years ago, but I got it 2 years ago. That the deployment of 5G in the vast mid-band spectrum was going to go as fast as the companies could do it. Why? Beside the fact that it didn't involve a capital spending increase, it turned out not to be that expensive. Uh, T-Mobile, as part of the deal to take over Sprint, committed to getting 5G to 99% of the country and getting 5G at 100 megabits, not too bad, to 90% of the country. They're currently at about 75%. They're going to meet the 90% just fine. And they say they're going to keep on going past that. Now, in the real world, and this was a firm commitment as part of their merger, they would have had a heck of a time getting out of it. And they didn't want to. They happened to have the right spectrum, mid-band spectrum for 5G. And at that point, AT&T and Verizon didn't have the right spectrum. So T-Mobile made the decision for business reasons that they would go as fast as anybody can. 5 years or so, because building a network across the entire United States for hundreds of millions of people really does take time.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a business decision, that it was a good idea. So they threw that into Washington as the thing to get the Sprint deal through. Most of the concessions made in these monopoly investigations are things the company are perfectly happy to do. So what they do, I saw it in, for example, AT&T buying Bell South. They take the things they're going to invest in and whatever policies they have that they think the regulators think are a great thing, and say, you have to give us this merger because otherwise we can't build out our broadband.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Okay, that was AT&T. So beneath a lot of what you see are hundreds of millions of dollars being spent by giant companies. The phone companies and the pharmaceuticals always were the best. Facebook and Google and so on are now getting pretty good and spending $100 million a piece and buying the best liars they can find. It just became a big thing in the EU, actually. Google and Facebook know the EU is coming after them. There've been literally over $10 billion worth of fines for breaking slews of competition law that have been assessed against them, most of which are still being tied up in court. So they're doing lobbying American style on a scale that nobody in Europe had ever seen before.
Amazing.
all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
I happened to want to check the LinkedIn of a Facebook spokesman that I had been talking with just to see where he was coming from. Did I say yes? And on LinkedIn, it shows you, do you also know and want to connect with? And then they pull people that are likely. In this
Mm-hmm.
case, they pulled half a dozen other public spokespeople for LinkedIn. And I clicked on those people. And within about 20 minutes, I could identify 30 lobbyists just for Facebook
Mm.
in Brussels.
Wow.
That's wow is the way it goes.
Yeah, yeah.
And the other thing they did is they did something that AT&T and Ciccone always did. Ciccone tried not to lie. He would have other people do his lying for him. The most notable of them, a specialist in the black arts, was a fellow named Charlie Black. Charlie used to put together in a way nobody had ever gotten this good, but now everybody's learned from it. These consumer organizations, small business organizations. He got
Fronts for the big companies. Mm-hmm.
fund them in the millions
Mm.
and have them say what, have them put out the lies like net
Mm-hmm.
neutrality, like having net neutrality would kill American broadband.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And people like Jim and Charlie were very, very good at what they did. For example, they persuaded the Washington chapter of the NAACP that one, net neutrality would kill the broadband deployment, and two, the people who would be hurt the most were going to be poor and minority people who didn't have the good broadband. And if the phone companies had to deal with net neutrality, would never get it because the net neutrality would kill their economics.
Wow.
So
Dave,
that's part of how they do it.
yeah.
Okay. They find
Misinformation.
what will persuade honest people. And I assume that the head of the NAACP in Washington was an honest person. I'm sure Vestager in Europe is an honest person because she's done a lot of good stuff. And I've met her. She's sharp. They are geniuses at finding the argument that will persuade honest people to go against their principles if they only understood the facts. And that's where much of this comes from. We're running out of time.
Yeah, we're out of time. Dave, this is fascinating because, you know, what we're talking about is the art of persuasion, the art of misinformation, and what to believe and how can you believe. I think this is something that we need to talk about some more because it is right at the forefront of our democracy and of where this world is going. And the technology stuff that we work in is the vehicle over which so much of this stuff is transported. So thank you, Dave. Any final words before we sign off?
Don't believe the hype.
Absolutely. Okay. This has been Community and Technology with Dave Burstein and Stu Reid, talking tech talk and breaking it down on WHCR 90.3 FM every Wednesday, 5 to 6 p.m. Stay tuned. You just might learn something. Thanks.